My first impressions of when I arrived at Pompeii was surprise at the scale of the city. You can see streets, columns, statues. It really was clearly a vibrant place. And yet you look to one side and it stares you in the face. There's the volcano, Mount Vesuvius, shadowing over the whole area. These people were living by this mountain, and this mountain ended up being their doom. The destruction at Pompeii has really captured people's imagination, particularly with the preserved bodies. Thousands frozen in time at the very moment of a horrifying death. But what's really quite surprising is when they uncovered the town of Herculaneum, a town much closer to the volcano than Pompeii. They found very, very few bodies. And that's a really intriguing question. Why so few bodies in Herculaneum? And why so many in Pompeii?
It was not just an excavation, but something like a detective story. It was really incredible.
I saw hundreds of skeletons. Who were these people? And how did they die?
On the flanks of this fearsome volcano, what really was the key to life and death?
Pompeii archaeologists made the discovery of what they term as an exceptionally rare find.
This is the latest in a series of fascinating discoveries that excavations at Pompeii have yielded in recent years.
I was born in northern Italy, in a small, nice town near Venice, but I've always loved archaeology. And southern Italy is the best place for archaeology because there are the most amazing archaeological sites in the world. I visited Pompeii for the first time during my high school. When I walked here, I really had the sense, the impression of walking in a Roman city. It was really love at first sight. We really didn't expect to find what we found.
What's special in Pompeii is that you're looking not at single works of art or not even single monuments, that it's all part of a city, and a city that was inhabited by people. I started to study archaeology because I was interested not so much in ancient art, but in history. So how did people live?
There was one discovery that sparked interest around the world.
It was really something very, very extraordinary. It all started with the police discovering an underground network of tunnels. Tomb raiders broke through the wall searching for precious objects and wall paintings
To take away and sell them on the illegal market for antiquities. They were caught in action and the excavation started. Outside the city of Pompeii there are many villas, but many of them had been excavated illegally. So this is a great opportunity to do a scientific excavation of such a site. The villa was first excavated in the early 20th century, but we had an extremely fragmented view of this site and actually didn't really know the importance of the villa until 2017. Nothing prepared us for what we would discover.
Digging in Pompeii is not that easy because the city is under about 6-8 meters of volcanic ashes. For an archaeologist, it was very unusual. The excavation was actually really an adventure because these tunnels are excavated in the ashes of the volcanic eruption. So it was also very dangerous because this tunnel had the risk to collapse. We started to excavate where there were traces of the illegal tunnels, and from there we are trying to understand the real layout of the villa. But actually this is quite complicated because part of the villa is below houses. But I think that the result that we got was really incredible. What was really surprising for the archaeologists is that it was a huge villa, probably one of the greatest villas in the Vesuvian area. But we were a bit disappointed because it was about 6 or 7 months. We were working there. We started to understand the real layout of the villa, but we weren't finding anything. And then, in the last day, we found the hole. And usually in Pompeii, when you find a hole in the volcanic ashes, it means that there is something below, that there is the traces of some organic materials.
While the organic material were dissolving, the imprints remained in the soil, and now as we as archaeologists come across this, we know it's important to stop excavating and we fill it with plaster.
The technique of the plaster casts allows us to reconstruct that which is not there anymore.
Then we get the imprint of animals, or sometimes also humans.
We poured the plaster into this hole, and when we excavated, we were so incredibly surprised. It was the cast of an entire horse. We suddenly called the archaeologists, "Oh, come here, there's an entire horse." And then we found another 2 horses. We suddenly understood that space was stable.
The new excavations continued there and started to bring to light something we'd never seen before.
It was of an extraordinary luxury, with decoration in gold and silver and bronze.
It was a really incredible chariot.
It was really a great surprise. But right next to it, there was a room which really, for me, is maybe the most touching and moving discovery I've made as an archaeologist.
this was a part of the villa which was formerly totally unknown.
There's no treasury here in terms of gold and silver and precious vases. But what is really special about this room is that we have the plaster casts of 3 beds. But they are really simple beds, very ordinary.
When I heard about the discovery of that room in the villa, I knew it was something special. Nothing like this has been found before. When I arrived in Pompeii, I'd obviously seen photographs, but there's nothing quite like arriving on site. It felt about as close as you could to time travel. So this is a really unusual scene to witness. This is the small room just near the stable. You can see how cramped it is. We expect there to be great wealth in these suburban villas. And here we see a room with bare walls, a bit of white plaster, very simple. And there's no mosaics on the floor. It sort of seems like it's just packed earth. So it's a sort of a little bit of a mystery as to what this room was, because it's doesn't really fit our picture of a lavish suburban villa. Not the elite part of the house at all. We're looking at very much a sort of a working room, a service room, if you like.
They brought amphoras, and this is a steering mechanism, probably from the chariot found in front of the door. And then you have all kinds of materials from the bridle and things linked to the horses. So it was a workplace, but it was also a living place. What we see here is really the most humble level of society. So it probably was a slave room. And there were at least 3 slaves living here, sleeping here.
It's an absolutely incredible find. These are the invisible people in the Roman period. It's quite emotional looking at and seeing and feeling so close to their lives. 1/3 of the population were probably enslaved people. Their jobs would range from shopkeeping to sex work. So we've got a lot of range here, but then suddenly we get this magnifying glass of their lives at this villa. There's 3 beds in the room. One of the beds is slightly smaller than the other 2, suggesting maybe there was a child. So it could have been a family unit of enslaved people. At this point, the excavation hadn't found any bodies. So everyone is wondering what happened to the inhabitants.
We started to excavate again, and we found another part of the villa. All the walls are covered by beautiful frescoes with mosaics and marbles. So it means probably where the owners of the house lived. We could understand that the owners of the villa were very rich and important people. But then, at the last 2 meters of excavation, we found more holes. We started to work around these holes, and with a very, very small camera that could enter in the holes, we found that there were bones. This means that we were in front of a victim. We worked during Saturday, Sunday, because we really didn't want to waste any moment. And then we found another victim. We started to excavate the ashes very, very fast. It was really an incredible excitement for us to see the faces of the two Pompeian people. And the cast were incredible. We found a young boy of about 18, 20 years. His bones had some clear traces that he had to carry heavy weights. We found that he has some deformation on his backbones. The second victims instead didn't have these traces on his bones. We think that he was about 35 years old. We were already thinking that he was an important person because he had a toga, but also he had other clothes over him, so it was clear that he was richer than the other victim. He's probably the owner of the house. The other man has a very short toga, and this was usually related to slaves.
This villa really presents us with a sort of detective story, which is essentially what archaeology is. So this image is really important because it gives you a real sense of the context in which these two people were found. They'd basically gone down to the lowest point they could in the villa in the cryptoporticus, so it's an underground passage. It shows how desperate they must have been at the time to take shelter and cover from the eruption. Clearly, sheltering here provided no protection. So the big question is, how did they die?
The only way to find out what happened in the villa is to work out how the volcanic eruption unfolded. Witnessing an eruptive volcano is really an assault on the senses. It's terrifying, but also mesmerizing. When I first went to Vesuvius, I was really hooked from day one. It turns out there's some really tantalizing details in one letter. Written by a man called Pliny the Younger, a Roman to an historian friend of his. He witnessed the eruption. And according to Pliny's letters, the eruption started around midday. You'd almost get a picture of what it must have been like just seconds before, and bang!
He says tall, broad flames blazed from several places on Vesuvius and glared out through the darkness. It was daylight everywhere else, but it was blacker and denser than any night. After a while, the darkness paled into smoke, but the sun shone as wanly as during an eclipse.
What we've been realizing, particularly from the way Pliny described it, it was almost sort of 24 hours worth of process that went on. The very first stage was this big explosive phase. And that immediately sent up this strange cloud, as Pliny described it. Big column of material that went high up into the atmosphere. What Pliny doesn't tell us is exactly what happened next inside Pompeii, and also the other towns around Vesuvius. But luckily, the volcano has left its own detailed record the events on that day, and I'm going to dig into them. I really wanted to see whether the eyewitness accounts actually match up with the deposits and the debris that we see that buried the towns. And it's by doing this that we can hopefully start to pinpoint what happened during the eruption hour by hour. At the southern tip of Pompeii, this spot is one of the few places left where you can still see some of the layers of volcanic deposits. When people think of volcanoes, they often think of these sort of mesmerizing red lava flows making their way down the mountain. But actually that didn't happen with the Mount Vesuvius eruption. What we see in the different parts of the layers tell us something about how the eruption took place. And when we start to look at the deposit, I mean, you can see the first sort of couple of meters here, things aren't really being destroyed. All of these pots are totally as they were standing around at the time. And that's because all of this deposit here is what we call the fall deposit. It's stuff that was coming out of the sky. It first started with this, what we call white pumice. So this very, very light material was raining out of the sky from this big cloud, this big eruptive cloud that Pliny described. And when we try and sort of unravel the timeline here, essentially from where my feet are up until this change from this sort of white pumice to the grey pumice, this represents the volcano sort of starting about 1 o'clock in the afternoon up until round about midnight. Clearly it's a very strange environment to be in. It's like a snowstorm, but it'll be really dark. You've got ash floating around in the air. There may be fires started by some of the hotter material that's landing. Quite a terrifying experience. It's difficult to imagine what it would be like being caught up in this. How do you survive it?
When it starts raining these pumice stones, the natural reaction is just to search cover somewhere. This becomes a deadly trap. People can't get out of the doors anymore because they're blocked by pumice stones.
Here was where we found the cast. One was over there, lying here, the younger one, while the oldest one was over here, with his foot under the chest of the other victims. After the excavation of these two victims, we wanted to know how they died. As happened in Pompeii, their particular position is typical. It's called the boxer position. It means that his hands are closed and very close to his face. It's really a physical reaction to something. They contracted the hands like that. It's really like a puzzle to reconstruct the last moment of life of this villa. But these two victims clearly survived to the first phase of the eruption. Then they were surprised by another phase.
One of the things that's really striking is just the visual difference between the layers here. You can actually see one on top of another, some of them almost like a stack of cards, showing you that there's a sideways movement. There's a current, there's a turbulent current that's deposited this here. It tells us that something back at the volcano was changing. This huge column of rock and ash that was bursting its way up into the sky has now collapsed. dense, turbulent current of rocks, hot pumice and ash, hot gases, all rolling over each other and barreling down the side of the mountain. These things can be hundreds of degrees in heat, and they can travel hundreds of miles an hour. It's engulfing things as it goes along. This is a pyroclastic flow. The whole thing is chaotic. It's a kind of angry stage in the eruption, from this stuff falling out the sky to all of a sudden the pyroclastic flow coming in and essentially just taking everything in its wake.
So many stories. People trying to escape outside Pompeii, some hiding. And so those who did what seemed probably the wrong thing in the first moment, to go through the rain of stones, had probably the biggest chance to survive.
Those who stayed behind went right to their death because there was no escape from the pyroclastic flow.
The devastation that was seen at Pompeii has really captured people's imaginations, particularly with the body molds that are preserved. Thousands of people dying. One of the things that's really puzzling is that you've got lots of bodies preserved at Pompeii, but closer to Mount Vesuvius in Herculaneum, another place smothered by the eruption, when they uncovered the city, they found very, very few bodies. So the big question is, why was it so different there?
Pompeii is very famous all over the world, but in the 90s, I had the opportunity to excavate victims in Herculaneum. Mostly anthropologists like me are used to just excavate graves from the graveyards. But in this case, it was completely different. It was the first time that I could study and excavate just victims of natural disaster. In that case, an eruption. Herculaneum, it's very, very important. It's very unique because within the town, were found just few victims, some 20, 30 victims. We thought that the large part of the inhabitants of Herculaneum, just they escaped. But that was an open question for decades. Why just very few people were there? In the 80s, the director of Herculaneum started an open-air excavation in the town. The excavators wanted to find victims. They were asking themselves, where are people? They just start the excavation in the suburban area, and 1981 they reached the beach. They start to excavate on the beach area, and suddenly they found something extraordinary. During the excavation, they just start to see that there were several chambers. And later they saw that these both chambers were just facing the sea. And the finding within the both chambers was something very surprising and also exceptional. There inside they found a lot of victims. In one room, you had maybe 40 skeletons. They start to excavate on the beach area, And then they found 30, 40 victims just laying on the beach. Altogether, the victims found within the boat chambers and on the beach are around 10 times more victims than in the tunnel. So we wanted to know who were these people and how did they die? The excavation and the study of the victims was a very complicated job. So you imagine that you have altogether 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 bones. So the first part of the job was just to recognize the single individual and then to start to remove the ash. That job we did with water. And in that way, we could just see all the skeletons all together and make a documentation for each individual. In Herculaneum, in the first deposit, there are no big pumice like in Pompeii. So this is quite different in the two towns, in the two sites. The ash is very fine. So it was very easy to excavate the victims. But we don't know who were these people. In this case, we have found these two female just close to each other, and between the legs of these two women there were found two small children. And also what is interesting that through the analysis of DNA of these people, we know that most of women, they are just local. But many of males are coming from other localities, like, for instance, the Mediterranean area, Near East, or Central Europe, and so on. So we wanted to know why there is a mix of nationalities here in Herculaneum. There was an intriguing clue. This is chamber number 10, and here this individual, this is a male, 35 years old about, and we found a metal ring around the ankle. And he was not the only one. So it's sure there were slaves, and also we know that a lot of people came from other countries. So very probably they came at least as slaves. The big question is, how did they die? I saw hundreds of skeletons and victims, but never something like this. Archaeologists from long time, they always said and thought that the people died all over and all around Vesuvius, Pompeii, Herculaneum, and so on. They died of suffocation because of the hot gases. In some cases, they were found on one side with hands in their faces to try to do the last breath. But I found in the boat chambers evidence that didn't fit with this theory. This is the skull of a victim found within a boat chamber, and we have some reddish brown mineral residual within this skull. So the brain was very rapidly boiling, and that caused the skulls to explode. So now we know that people in the boat chambers were not suffocated by ash and gas. The temperature was high enough to kill them instantly. but bodies in Pompeii looks different to the ones in Herculaneum. So does it mean that pyroclastic flow was different here? In Pompeii, many people show this kind of pugilistic attitude. So it seems that you are repairing yourself, just try to defend yourself, but it's not true. This is something after you died. You see that the bodies were just kept complete, full of bones, flesh, everything. In Herculaneum, you don't have this kind of attitude. And that's due to the rapid disappearing of the flesh. All evidence show that the temperature of the pyroclastic surge was much higher in Herculaneum than in Pompeii. When I saw the corpses of victims in Herculaneum, I thought that it was really a terrible situation at that time. To see all these people, young people, children, and so on, all together, then it was really something very unbelievable. Very probably they didn't know that Vesuvius was a volcano, but they knew very well earthquakes. That's why they were just within the boat chambers, because that was very saved from earthquakes, but not in case of an eruption.
What is still puzzling to me is the difference between both towns. Why so few bodies in Herculaneum? And why so many in Pompeii? You can see that there's this huge wall of volcanic debris that came down off the volcano. Some 60+ feet of debris lying above my head. But that just didn't happen in an instant. When you look a bit closer, and I can see here, you can actually see changes in the layers. What it shows is not just one pyroclastic flow, but a whole succession of them. And what we can do is we can walk up through this layer cake of rock and work out exactly how many of these pyroclastic flows came down during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The evidence here in this wall shows us that there was at least 6 different pyroclastic flows. And it's the first 2 that bury Herculaneum, but they don't entirely reach Pompeii. And that is a big clue as to what happened. It was one volcano and one eruption, but 2 different sequences of events in each city. So what determined whether you lived or died? And if you died, how you died? Now I can fully unravel the timeline of what happened in the AD 79 eruption of Mount Vesuvius. At around midday, the volcano erupted. It's explosive and it's more powerful than anything you can imagine. Millions of tons of rock, pumice and ash are ejected, forming a giant column of ash and debris towering 20 miles into the sky. And it's by sheer bad luck that these stratospheric winds take the debris, carry the debris over and drop it onto Pompeii. Ash and pumice would continue to rain down for the next 18 to 20 hours, trapping people inside their homes like the 2 people found together at the villa. The first buildings start to collapse under the weight of the debris.
while people were just dying in Pompeii, we know actually that most of Herculaneum was just evacuated. They escaped in the north direction through Naples.
Sadly, some stayed behind in Herculaneum and sheltered in the boat chambers. Some 12 hours after the eruption, the ash column collapses. The first pyroclastic flow travels at over 100 miles an hour in the direction of Herculaneum.
So we know that the first pyroclastic surge came into the city, went into the buildings, killed the people here in the town, reached rapidly the beach, and the temperature is at least 500 degrees centigrade. They died just in a fraction of a second. They had no time to react. So the people didn't feel anything.
Over in Pompeii, things played out differently. It spared the first pyroclastic flow. Instead, the city is pelted by a shower of pumice. After 18 hours, the pumice fall starts to ease.
And the morning after, there were probably something like half an hour of quiet and peace. Probably people thought that the eruption was finished.
But it's a short-lived period of calm before Mount Vesuvius launches another pyroclastic flow.
They try to save themselves.
This pyroclastic flow does reach Pompeii. It traveled further than the ones that hit Herculaneum, so it was slightly cooler, but still lethal.
They didn't know what was happening, and they died. I worked in Pompeii for many years, but this was very unique because here you really have a very important and particular picture of 79 AD. And this clearly was terrible.
It's the 4th and the 5th, and eventually the 6th that completely cover the area. And it is, I mean, even this preserved bit here is a harrowing scene. Absolute chaos.